Okay, welcome everybody. Tonight I'm going to talk about electric vehicles. My name is Ron Cultival. I'm a member of the Nature Council, and I'm actually here with another hat on. President of EVADC, or the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C. We're the D.C. area chapter of a nationwide organization, and we mostly owners, but not everybody has an EV, but folks that are interested in EVs. So we're one part car club, but one part advocacy group. So we take our vehicles out to different events, lobby for good EV policy and things like that. And what you see on the screen there, a little bit of my history with EVs. In the upper right-hand corner, we have our 2012 Leaf. That's my wife and daughter with me there. Seems like a long time ago because our daughter graduated from college this past May, so it's time flies. That vehicle had 84 miles of range, and when we first got it, I referred to it as our second car because the range is pretty short. But quickly realized that all the short trips you do really add up to be a lot of your miles, and we learned we could go further than we really thought. We also actually had to curtail our driving of the car because it was on a lease and we were going to overrun the lease. So we had to drive it a little less than we wanted to. So we had a second Leaf in 2016, had that for 2 years and was on the list for the Model 3. But I wanted the all-wheel drive version because I'm a skier. And so I wanted to wait for that. And we had to do something, so we ended up getting a Bolt and then the Model 3 a little bit later. So now we're a 2 EV family with red Bolt, getting around close to 250 miles of range, and the Tesla Model 3 close to 300. So that's a little bit about my background. I've been driving electric since 2012, and my wife and I have well over 150,000 miles on our EVs so far. So I started mentioning a little bit about EVADC. Our chapter was started in 1980, the parent organization in 1967. And back in those days, it was about DIY, do-it-yourself EVs, people converting, cars and trucks. That still happens, but it's a lot less now that we have a lot of commercial vehicles. When we talk about electric vehicles, there's a couple of different terms here that get used. Now, the challenge here is all of these terms are not standard. Different folks use them in different ways. But generally, if we refer to electrified vehicles, that's going to include the following three categories: hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and battery electric vehicles. Hybrids, probably many of you have, or definitely have ridden in one. That's where we have a gasoline engine with an electric motor and a small battery that's charged from coasting and braking and other things, and gives the gas engine an assist. This can be used to make the car a little bit peppier and provide us more power, or it can be used to make the engine a little bit smaller and get better gas mileage, or sometimes a combination of the two. Then we move up to plug-in hybrids. Plug-in hybrids have a gasoline engine and a battery pack, but they also have a plug, and you can charge the vehicle by plugging it in and get a longer range. These things can be 10 miles, but up to 40 or 50. And generally these can run some distance on electric only. And lastly, we have fully electric vehicles. So no gas engine, no catalytic converter, no muffler, none of that stuff. It runs just on electricity. Not everyone uses these terms the same. So for example, Chrysler has a minivan that they refer to as a hybrid, even though it's a plug-in hybrid. So different manufacturers use them differently. The key though is if you see a manufacturer talk about their electrified vehicles, they probably are including hybrids. If they talk about electric vehicles, then they're likely not including hybrids, and they may or may not be including plug-ins. It just varies. There's no standard terminology here, but that's the three basic types. So one of the key advantages of electric vehicles is regenerative braking. And this is basically one of the things that sets all, even hybrids do this as well. So all three types do this. So, and I should have my acronyms put out here. ICE cars. ICE stands for internal combustion engine. And so it's the acronym we use in the EV space, just shorter to say than saying internal combustion engine. These cars are very inefficient. When you brake, you lose all that braking energy as heat, because friction is what's stopping the car, and so you waste all that energy. There's other wastes as well, which I'll get into later. Well, in an EV, there's something called regenerative braking. And so what happens here is the electric motor that propels the car can run in reverse and become a generator, and you put energy back into the batteries. This also means that there's the brakes last longer. You're not using the friction brakes very much. It's mostly regenerative. Now, different cars vary as to how much they use regenerative braking and how strong they are for that. But it does mean that your brakes last longer than without regenerative braking, and how much depends on the vehicle. So some other benefits of EVs besides regenerative braking are on this list. So one of the big things is lower fuel and operating costs. Now, EVs tend to cost more upfront cost than an equivalent gasoline car, though it varies. For your higher end vehicles, your so some of the Teslas and things, offerings like Audi and BMW and those kind of manufacturers, the difference in price between their gas models, comparable gas model and electric model, is not generally, it's not always higher for the electric model. It varies, but there's a lot more closeness in price. The lower end of the scale, you do pay a premium still for EVs, but that's coming down, and that will disappear as scale ramps up and the manufacturers get better at manufacturing these vehicles. The pandemic and supply chain has slowed down that cost parity for purchase, but it's coming. But there's one thing that's definitely a benefit, and that's lower operating costs. EVs are about 3 or 4 cents a mile. It varies on how you charge it, but that's the rough range. And gasoline, that 5 to 30 cents is kind of like, it's all over the map. Sometimes it's a lot more than that with gas prices fluctuating like they are. There's no toxic fumes from running your EV. Some of us are more sensitive to that than others. I mentioned a little bit about maintenance around the brakes. There's also, your main maintenance are, tire rotations, brake checks, wiper fluid, things like that, but no tune-ups, no oil changes, none of those things. So that's a nice savings in money and time. One of the great things about electric motor is you have instant torque. So manufacturers, especially with their sports cars, will advertise horsepower. And higher horsepower, is fun to drive, and it's more of a sports car. But it's actually torque, and torque is the turning force that makes a car accelerate rapidly and provides that get up and go, or that zip that makes a car fun. And electric motors have instant torque, so EVs generally have very good to fantastic acceleration. Makes them quiet and fun to drive, but it's also can be a safety advantage. When I'm merging into traffic on the highway, in our old gas car, sometimes you'd have a tight spot, you'd have to really, tricky to find an opening to get into traffic. With the EV, either one of them, it's not a problem. Great acceleration, which is really nice. EVs are much cleaner, and we'll get into more of that later. And for those worried about foreign policy, except for a little bit of Canadian hydro, all of our electricity is US generated electrons. So that's a good thing from an economy standpoint. So let's talk about charging a little bit. This is one of the topics that people oftentimes have questions about, and mainly because it's new to folks. There are 3 levels of charging: level 1, 2, and 3. And that plug there, if we can see my mouse here in the lower left-hand corner, that's a plug that's standard on most cars. And both level 1 and level 2 use this kind of plug. Level 1 is any common outlet. You're going to get 3 to 5 miles of range per hour, which is not a lot. But if you have a short commute, you can charge overnight. That may be just all you need. It's also used, so let's say you're going to the beach for the weekend and you're at an Airbnb, and there's a plug there you can use for your car. Plug your car in and it's back to fully charged over the weekend, even if it is a long range vehicle. So level 1 does have its uses. Most charging occurs at level 2. This requires what's oftentimes referred to as the dryer circuit, a 240 volt circuit. The number of amps will, and then what the car can take will dictate how much range you get back. Most cars are in that mid 20 range. Some of the higher end cars can go, and newer cars can get up to into the mid 40s with the right connection. And lastly, we have DC charging, DC fast charging, or level 3. There are 3 main plug types, which I have pictures below. Here, your car has to have the right type for the charger. And the CHAdeMO one, the one kind of in the middle of all those pictures there, that plug is basically in the US. Very few vehicles have that anymore. It's a very big plug, and it's really going away. The one on the right side of the screen there, that's the Tesla plug. And that plug is used for all 3 levels for Tesla, but they have an adapter to use this plug here that everything else uses for level 1 and level 2. And then the middle plug is what most cars today, as of now, use. But here the speeds vary a lot, depending on your vehicle, what it can take, what the charger's rated at, anywhere from 50 to 200 miles back in 30 minutes. There's also an important thing here to remember about when you charge your EV. If you're say you're on a road trip or whatever, charging an EV there's some similarities to pouring a glass of beer. So if you have an empty glass, you're pouring beer into it. When the glass is empty, you can go faster without the glass foaming over. But as you get closer to full, you got to slow down. Well, batteries are the same way. They charge faster when they're close to empty, and they slow down as they get full. Now, how much they slow down varies. Not all cars are the same. Some slow down at 40% full, some not till 50 or 60, some the whole way to 80 or 85. But that's an important thing you learn about your vehicle, and it's helpful to know when you're traveling. So this is a map of charging, and the thing I want to talk about here is there are a number of ways to find public charging. And the most common is an application called PlugShare. Now, PlugShare is available as an app for your smartphone. It's also available as a website, plugshare.com. And when you go there, you can actually go and find charging. You can put in an address and see what's there. So this is helpful for finding out where you might charge if you're considering an EV, or maybe you have one, you're going on a trip, and the different colors are based on the level of charging. This also gives you scores. So a charger rated at 10 is very reliable. Something rated at 1, not so much. And so there's a social media aspect of this too, where people actually rate the chargers they use, and you can find out about, reliability of them. This map here shows something called Electrify America. So many of you may remember the Dieselgate scandal from VW several years ago. Well, they cheated. They rigged their cars to cheat on emissions test. Well, they had to pay some serious penalties in the settling that scandal. And one of many was building a charging network. So they had to spend $2 billion over 10 years, and they're probably about 5 or 6 years into it now, building out charging. And so this map shows, this is based as of May, where they have charging across the United States. This is along major corridors. There's over 800 locations. And this is one of the bigger networks out there for fast charging. And you can get, through, it's a lot on each coast, but then there's some corridors cross country in different spots. The next big network is Tesla's Supercharger network. So this is also of May. This has more than double the locations of the previous one, and 5 times the number of actual plugs. And you can get, it's very, very densely a number of chargers on both coasts, and also major metropolitan areas. You can see that, Denver and Chicago and Dallas and so forth. But even across country, there's lots of different, even in rural areas, routes, and well into Canada and a lot of Mexico as well. In Frederick, we have Tesla. You may have seen the Tesla superchargers at Francis Scott Key Mall. There's actually some now at the Sheets right near there. There's some in Urbana. There's just those three just right in the county. And so these are all over the place with a lot more on the way. Now, currently these are for Tesla only. So one of the things that's developing story on this just in the past 3 weeks is that Ford was first. Ford announced that they were going to adopt Tesla's charging plug and charging connection. So I mentioned earlier the different kinds of fast charging, the CCS and the Tesla connector. One of the challenges with charging is charger reliability. A lot of chargers just aren't as reliable as they should be. There are outages. Tesla's network of superchargers has a couple key advantages. One, there are just more of them than anything else. Two, they are extremely reliable. Three, they're generally the faster type, mostly the faster on the faster end of charging. And four, the experience is just seamless. You plug you plug into the charger, it automatically recognizes your car, your credit card's on file, it charges you, and you just plug it in and go. There's an app so you can monitor it. You can walk away and go get lunch. The car will give you a pop-up whenever you get close to being done. It's just a seamless experience. So Tesla has always made noise of offering the network to other manufacturers, but others weren't taking them up on it. Because one of Tesla's rules for this was, well, you had to help pay for the system. Well, they had an announcement, like I said, about 3 weeks ago from Ford, and Ford is going to switch to the Tesla connector starting in the model year 2025. And they're working on an adapter for their current vehicles so they can use the Tesla network. Just 2 weeks later, GM announced the same thing. And Tesla has been more active in trying to push this, and they renamed their system the North American Charging Standard. Now, it's technically not an official standard. There's no standards body that controls that. But there's some success here. And I think a lot of this has to do with manufacturers just realizing that, the reliability and advantages were just too great to pass up. It's unclear how this is going to end up. I think with GM and Ford, joining up with Tesla on this, it's pretty likely that a lot of other manufacturers will as well, but that's to be seen. And a funny story, I have this little, this is from an article I found. It's refers to Farley, the Farley refers to as Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford. And he was on a trip in a Mustang Mach-E, which is an all-electric Mustang, with the family sometime. I'm not sure if the last year was in 2022 or earlier this year. And they were going from Lake Tahoe to Monterey. And his kids kept pointing out superchargers and say, can we stop there? And their dad kept saying, no, we have to find a different kind. And there were a lot more Tesla superchargers on their path. And they were a lot more convenient than the ones they had to go look for. So maybe those kids helped in some small way, pushing them to look into this and adopt this. Well, one would think that that'd be a kind of a fun way if it had some role to play in this. So this is going to be, like I said, it's a developing story. Tesla was already working on adapters for other cars to use their networks, but if manufacturers adopt their plug directly, that's going to be big news, and it really we'll see how it ends up. But I think this could be a really positive thing, especially if network expands even more and charging is more reliable for everybody. Continuing on with chargers, there's a lot of support for chargers in the various bills that got passed in the last Congress. And all the states are working on plans to use those money. There's money in the infrastructure bill and also in the Inflation Reduction Act. So the states are working on that money to get out there and put in more charging. So I mentioned how the EVs are cleaner. Well, one of the cool things is that your EV gets cleaner over time. So if you buy an EV today, and let's say you're just charging it from the grid, as the grid gets cleaner, your EV gets cleaner because you're charging with cleaner electrons. Our gas cars, our internal combustion engine cars, they get a little dirtier over time, wear and tear in the engine. Plus, as we move to unconventional fossil fuels, like tar sands fuels, for example, or other things that are unconventional, those are just dirtier to turn into gasoline, turn into products. And so in some ways, our gasoline cars get actually dirtier over time. Also, if you want to, you can put solar on your roof or select wind power from utility and drive on the wind or drive on sunshine. And that's another way to make your car even cleaner and guarantee that you're using renewable electrons. So this map is from the Union of Concerned Scientists. And this is a map from 2014. And it shows the miles per gallon by region that a gasoline car needed to get to match the pollution of an EV charged from the grid. Now, the lines are not state boundaries, they're grid boundaries, because the grid doesn't necessarily follow along states. But even the dirtiest area here, back in 2014, basically Colorado, parts of Wyoming, was 38 miles per gallon, which most cars back then didn't get. Your Priuses and a few got up in that range, but most cars weren't anywhere close to that. So even your dirtiest region was cleaner. But large swaths of the country here are in the light blue, which is above 50, many of them in the 70s and higher. And so much cleaner than even your best hybrid at the time. Now we jump ahead. This is a map from 2018, 4 years later. And notice that everywhere but 3 little pockets are now above 50 miles per gallon. Many of these are above 100. And so the grid has overall gotten cleaner almost everywhere. But that also means that if someone bought an EV in 2014, 4 years later in 2018, driving it was cleaner when they bought it. And so that's pretty amazing. Kind of like, wine gets better with age. Well, your EV gets better with age in this respect as well. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a newer map than this. I need to find one, but I can only imagine 5 years later, these numbers are going to be just massively better than they were in 2018. So this is a really good news story around having an EV, and not just from a climate perspective, but also from an air quality perspective. We're finding, there's a lot of pollution, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. So I'm not going to talk about this a lot, but I want to talk about a little bit about other types of heavy duty EVs. So electric buses are, after a slow start, picking up a lot of momentum in the country. I'm proud to say that Ferry County was the first transit system in Maryland to have electric buses, and they're adding more. But the U.S. is still behind the curve on this. There is a city in China that has over 10, their fleet of buses is over 10,000, and they were all electric a few years ago. We might have 10,000 or so nationwide, but that's picking up speed. And so we're moving on this, but just not as fast as we could have been. But this is a good news story, especially from a local pollution level, because if you have buses in cities, a lot of times they're running in areas that are already heavily polluted, and that diesel bus just is, if you walk in a major city and there's all this bus traffic and all these diesel fumes, I know it bothers me, and I'm sure anybody, especially with someone with asthma or whatever, kids especially, getting these buses converted is an important health benefit. Garbage trucks. This wasn't the first, but I think it was the first. It was first in Maryland, not the first in the country. But Hyattsville deployed a garbage truck in October 2021. It's all electric. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, because I get this question all the time when I'm doing this in person. Wait a minute, if we're struggling to get cars with good ranges, how can we do this big garbage truck and make it all electric? Well, there's a couple advantages of electric garbage truck and doing electric in that kind of vehicle. For one, it's not driving high speeds. Two, it's driving a known route, which is generally a relatively small number of miles. It's doing a lot of stop and go, so regenerative braking is helpful. And the nature of the vehicle is one that where having a lot of torque, so torque to run the compressor where they compress the garbage and just torque to carry a load, that's a valuable use case for this. And electric motors are really good at torque. So while it may seem counterintuitive, this big a vehicle being something that's out there and doable, this is actually a good use case for it, or you're going to see more of these over time. And I've seen lots of stories with, there's a outfit in, I think, Wisconsin that has an electric fire engine. It's different than what you would recognize as a normal fire engine, but there's all kind of different applications here and work being done on these heavy duty vehicles. Also in development are semi trucks and airplanes. That the blue semi there, that's the Tesla semi, and they've started delivering after a bit of a delay since their announcement. They're finally delivering those, but a lot of other manufacturers are making electric semis, electric trucks as well. And so we're going to start seeing a lot more of these. And while the number of trucks is relatively small compared to the number of vehicles on the road, based on miles driven, fuel consumed, and emissions generated, trucks are a major component of transportation. And so this is a welcome thing to see the movement in this area. Planes, this is a small plane that's all electric. There is a growing effort around, mostly small planes. I don't expect to see, electric 747s anytime soon, or 707s or anything like that. But these smaller planes, definitely. Maybe some of your regional jets, do the 500-mile, people refer to puddle jumper kind of flights, or more likely hybrid technology where you have an electric system for part of the flight, but maybe you have electric for cruising or something like that. So planes are going to become electrified to varying degrees, but it won't be the only solution when it comes to planes. So let's get into some other big picture benefits. I've kind of touched on some of these already, but let's get into some more detail. So this chart, and this ends in 2022, but the lines will be even more all over the map. But one of the things about gasoline is the cost of gasoline is very volatile. It's way up and down, huge swings. And sometimes you see here, pretty dramatic swings. And this is very challenging for low-income families, especially, and for fleet operators. And so the fueling of a vehicle with electricity is much more predictable, much more consistent. And so it's much easier to plan for, and it's a benefit for everybody, but especially those two groups. Now, this chart ends right around the pandemic, and I've looked at getting a newer one, but the challenge is that the pandemic had so many specialized effects that the chart kind of doesn't have a lot of meaning. It gets kind of complicated. But this shows the trends, though, pre-pandemic of CO2 emissions by sector. And you can see that transportation, power was our largest sector, but it's on a general downward curve, and that's accelerating. Transportation went down a little bit, but was basically flat, and it needs the most attention. And the good news here is that electrifying vehicles is a known way to address this. So one of the things that is important to think about when it comes to EVs or any really technology that helps address climate is looking at what's called co-benefits. And co-benefits are things that basically you adopt something, but you get a benefit that that goes along for the ride. You didn't really go buy it directly. And this has a couple different manifestations for EVs. For one, research is showing us that air pollution and our effect on our health is much worse than we thought. And so even though our skies are cleaner for the most part than they were in the early 70s, we're finding out that we're still getting a lot of health effects from the pollution that we can't see, the fine particulates. Moving away from fossil fuels and combustion fuels would vastly improve air quality and result in massive health cost savings. And economists have predicted that and modeled this to show that the health cost savings would more than offset the cost of the transition. And so this is an important health thing. And it also helps enable, if you're advocating for these things, there's a quote that I found attributed to Dwight Eisenhower: "The problem cannot be solved, enlarge it." So if someone's pushing for EVs for climate, let's say, for example, they may be a relatively small group that wants to do that. But if you can also engage people that are concerned about public health and equity for low and income folks who tend to live in more polluted areas, those people can enlarge your tent for pushing for a policy and help it make it easier to get something accomplished. And so here's one of the studies I referred to. This is, I think this was like 2 falls ago when this came out. The American Lung Association had a report on healthy air, and they projected $1.2 trillion, trillion with a T, in public health benefits by moving to zero emission transportation electricity. So this is real money, but it's also real lives saved, lives that are less encumbered, and lives that are just not burdened with air pollution. So this is an important thing that we need to think about. So coming out, it was the beginning of the year. There's new EV tax credits, and I'm going to jump ahead here because this chart gives a better description of it. There is credit is divided into 2 categories, and this is complicated because how do you know where the components came from and where the minerals came from? Well, there's a website you can go to, and I'll have a better link at the end of my closing slide. It makes it easy to just go look and see what models qualify and what models don't. There are income caps, and those are on that page as well. What's new and nice about this is that used EVs now count for the credit, but there are some controls so that this doesn't get abused. Vehicle must be at least 2 years old, under $25,000, sold by a dealer. There are income caps. And what's not here is that you can only use it once per vehicle. So I can't buy an EV in 2 years, sell it to a friend. In 2 years, they sell it to a friend, and so forth and so on, and keep getting the tax credit. It's one-time use for the vehicle, and so it helps to get rid of that potential for abusing this credit. EV sales are climbing. Generally, in the U.S., but especially globally, sales of automobiles are flat or slightly declining. This highlights the year 2020 to 2021, where overall vehicle sales in the US grew by 3%, but EV sales grew by 85%. These trends are continuing, and they vary by country, but depending on the stats you look at and what you count, as high as 30% of new vehicles worldwide are EVs. Now, that number is so high because there's a lot of EV sales of two-wheeled and three-wheeled vehicles in the developing world. Europe and China are selling EVs faster than we are, but we're definitely picked up a lot of steam from the past, and EV sales are growing in the US quite quickly. Anyway, there's a lot of EVs you can choose from today. Trucks and SUVs just started to become available last year. F-150 Lightning, Ford can't make enough of them. I've seen the vehicle. I've talked to people that own it. They love it. It's the Silverado is due soon. Ram is coming out soon. Rivian has their trucks. There's lots of things coming out. I mentioned PlugShare for finding charging and where you might look for that. Also, one key point of this is don't let that one special case a year be a roadblock to going electric. You can always rent something for those, that one time you need it. People will, they want a truck because they're going to bring home mulch from the Home Depot, or they going to buy us, couch and want to be able to bring it home. Well, how often do you actually do those things? We oftentimes want our cars to do absolutely everything. And so we buy, a vehicle that's not suited to our most common usage. So just think about that. I have a friend of my EV group that when he got his first EV, he had a really long commute. It was his daily round trip commute was about 100 miles. And the only EV at the time he could afford was that Leaf that had 85 miles of range. Well, his employer had workplace charging, so he could, charge up at home, drive to work, plug in for the 8-hour, 9-hour day, be fully charged to come home, and it wasn't a problem. And he saved a small fortune on gasoline. And for those few times he needed to go on a longer trip to visit family, whatever, he'd rent a vehicle, and the savings more than paid for that. So that's something to consider. So in summary, things are going fast here. Most automakers have announced plans to end production of gasoline and diesel cars, or what's referred to as light duty vehicles. Some of those plans vary. Like I think, I believe it's Audi has said no new gasoline models starting in 2025. So they'll still sell gasoline cars, but they won't introduce any new models after that. And once that model has run their course, everything will be electric going forward. But some have more aggressive timelines than others. Most are targeting somewhere between 2030 and 2035 as their target dates. But even like, Bugatti and Bentley and some of the huge marquee luxury brands are going on this path, as well as the mainstream automakers at different rates, admittedly. So not only they're quieter, but one is I get, a lot of folks have jumped on the early adopters, got into EVs for environmental reasons, but that's not the only reason to get one. These are, from over 10 years of driving electric and having the Model 3 for 5, these are just better vehicles, quieter, faster, more efficient, just a joy to drive. And just one quick note here. When I'm driving on a long trip in the Model 3, the lack of vibration, the quiet, all those things, it's just a much more comfortable experience, less tiring. I tend to be able to, drive further without getting sleepy, and it's just a better driving experience. I don't arrive, tired and as tired as it would in a gasoline car. Don't be scared off by higher purchase costs. It may not work for you, depends on your situation, but lower operating costs will make up for that in many cases. And so for a lot of EVs, if you look at a 10-year cost of ownership, you're going to be better off for the same as a gas car, but you do have to sometimes pay more upfront, and not everybody can do that. So I only mentioned lots of models and the F-150. The truck thing is a big deal because it opens up a whole new world for bringing EVs to people that we didn't have before. So I want to close with a couple highlights here. I want to mention my EV group. We do a call called Ask an EV Owner, and it's basically a Zoom call we do the first Wednesday of the month. And it's just, call in and ask your questions. It can be shopping for an EV. You can be an new EV owner that, like, how do I do this? You just go to evadc.org/ask, and it'll give you the details for the Zoom link. Thanks everybody for calling in. I hope you found this useful.